These are the frequently made mistakes for programming assignment 1. Please document your code thoroughly and take a look at my examples for illustrations of good ways to document code. I don't think there's a need to have hash values, hash functions, hash methods, and so on in the program. We'll take a closer look at that when we get a little further down, but you shouldn't need to do any hashing like this. This is a good approach to essentially define a helper class and put the bulk of the fields and the business logic in that helper class. However, it's probably a pretty good idea to refactor the code to use the service annotation and have a separate service class, and then have your controller be where you handle the HTTP requests with the get mapping and put mapping and so on. Now let's take a look at some issues with video controller itself. Please make sure you document your code so we know why you do certain things. It wasn't clear why there was a get video by title path string. Here's a bunch of things that need to be addressed. So the code originally looked like this. The person didn't properly put in the generic types for the map type for the parameter or for the field. So make sure you do that. In that case, you do not need to put any types here. So you don't have to, you can omit the type parameters when you have a hash map. That's also good habit to get into. The compiler will yell at you and tell you to do that. So make sure you do that. You also should definitely, get in the habit of using typed generics. Don't use it like I'm showing it here. Name the field something sensible. Don't call them video list when it's a map. That doesn't really make any sense. Don't make it static. Make it an instance variable, not a static. Definitely don't want to create something like a copy on write array list. That's inefficient. It's linear search. You should use a hash map and the values method. We'll see that greatly simplifies the code in many places. Down here, again, don't use array list, just like you don't need to use copy on write array list. Don't use array list, use a hash map. And again, make sure you get rid of the type information here. You don't need it twice. You don't need to have it in there twice. Wasn't quite sure why someone used a post construct. It's certainly possible to do that. It's another annotation, but it's probably easier just to initialize the fields in the class itself. And it was also unclear why the video ID generator was starting at the value 10. Since there were no documents, no comments or anything, it was even more mysterious. This is just good style. You don't really need to write out if such and such is true, then return true, else return false. You can just use the Boolean nature of a method call to return video repo find by ID is present, which is much more streamlined and much more concise and friendly. Here is another thing I saw a number of people do. Great idea to get in the habit of always initializing your local variables when you define them, because it's less likely that you're going to have an uninitialized variable problem. In that case, it's all too easy to do something like this, and then somebody puts in an if statement somewhere, and lo and behold, before you know it, you haven't initialized your variables properly, which is hard. It's a tricky bug to try to track down. So get in the habit of combining them together. Down here, this is the upload video method. You don't want to create a new video object here. This implementation is also very inefficient. You don't need to have a video list that's a list. You want to use a hash map, and you want to call the get method on the hash map. That'll be much more efficient as soon as you get more than just a couple of videos in the video list. So that's just a nice way to clean it up, make it more efficient. Let's see. Again, good thing to get in the habit of. Don't define a local variable, assign it, and then return it. Just return the results of calling the method that you would have assigned to the local variable. Just kind of cleans the code up, more concise, easier to comment, less error prone. Here's an example. I don't think it's necessary to take the result that comes back from find all from video repo, which I think is a collection or a list, and then wrap it in an array list. I think you can just return it directly which will make the code a little cleaner and reduce the dependency on some of the Guava classes like lists.newArrayList. I don't think you need that. This code is way too complicated. There were a bunch of different things here, and I wasn't quite sure what the intent was of creating something called a video entity. And it looks like it made the code a lot more complicated. I don't think it was documented, so it was unclear what the rationale was behind that. But it's probably easier just to have the video repository, in this case, store a video instead of a video entity. And then all you have to do is just say video repository.findAll, and you'll get the result back. Again, no need to convert videos into a stream and then collect it into a list. Just go ahead and use the values method on a hash map. If you make the field videos, or whatever you call it, be a map that's implemented by hash map, then all you have to do is just say hash map.values, and it'll go ahead and give you back what you need. I think you also probably want to return this as a collection instead of a list, but that's probably okay. Again, there's really no need to create a local variable, which is a list of videos, and do all this extra stuff. just go ahead and say return videos.values, much more concise. Definitely don't want to be, taking values and wrapping it inside an array list. That's unnecessary. You can just say video values. It returns it as a collection. You're done. Same thing here. This is really something you don't want to be doing. You don't want to be getting yourself a list and then making another list and then adding things to the list and then returning that list. Just return the results of find all, and it should be very concise. Also, don't need to do this. You don't need to create a list where you're going to be adding stuff. Just say video maps or videos map.values, and boom, it's there. A bunch of people were trying to do something really complicated with calling random and multiplying by max value and using the arint method. And I'm not even sure that that's really guaranteed to give you unique IDs. So it's probably much more efficient to just have an atomic long that you initialize to 0 and increment it 1 by 1 every time. That'll give you a nice sort of guaranteed unique ID, as long as you don't overflow the value of 2 to the 63 minus 1 or something like that, or 2 to 64 minus 1. This is a good example. We don't need to have a hash value. There's no need to do this. Way too complicated. Just use atomic long. It makes all the complexity just disappear. This particular field that's passed in can be set as a long rather than a string. So if you do that, then you don't have to convert the result. You can let the code itself, the endpoint, a handler endpoint method, basically do that conversion for you, so you don't have to do it yourself. That's a little cleaner. In this case, if you define repository to be a map that's properly typed, then there's no need to use a cast. So that's yet another motivation for getting in the habit of using generics properly with the hash map or anything that's generic. Again, this is way too complicated. We don't need to create a video and then go through a list and blah 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 blah. That's very inefficient. Just make it a hash map and call get on it. Be cleaner, shorter, faster, and so on. I don't think you need to throw an exception in this case. If you're sending back the 404 error, there's no need to throw an exception. I don't think that buys you anything. You're already getting the error back to the client. Let's see. So this code seems very complicated for no particularly good reason. I think if you have it return a video instead of a string, then you can get rid of all the read value stuff and the object mapper stuff and so on. It just gets really lean and mean and slim, much more efficient. This code is really inefficient. A number of people, I applaud people by wanting to use Java streams, that's cool, but don't use Java streams incorrectly. So there's no point in using a stream in this case, because what you're doing is you're turning what should be a hash lookup, which at least in theory is amortized, O of 1 lookup complexity, and you're turning it into linear search. So it may look cool, but it's very inefficient. So you're changing something from being very efficient to being very inefficient or unnecessarily inefficient. Same thing here. There's no need to use map. There's no need to use filter. There's no need to use stream. There's no need to use find first or else, all those things. Just say, map.get, and there you go. You'll get it right away. Let's see. Same issue here. Instead of returning list of video, return a collection of video, and then just use the values method on map to get the collection of videos. The following suggestions are really more about style. There's nothing wrong about using request mapping, but you're probably going to make your code a little simpler to understand if you use the post mapping annotation. And also, it's a good habit to get into to try to use symbolic constants for things like this, because then it's a little bit more clear what you're doing, number one. And number two, if you decide to change anything, it's easy to change it in one fell swoop. Same comment here. You should get in the habit of using the get mapping annotation as opposed to the request mapping. It's just more precise, I guess is the best term. And again, use symbolic constants for the value and so on. Here again, you can return this collection video, in which case you don't need to wrap the values in an array list. So that's nice and clean. This one, I guess there was some reasons behind this, but it seemed awfully complicated and wasn't really clear why certain things were being used, like why callable was being used in a raw form instead of providing the appropriate type, because I think all the types were all video, so that's probably a better way to do it. Then there wouldn't, this is something else that's specific to that person's solution. There was an as method that did some funky stuff with casting, and I don't think that would have been necessary there either. So that's kind of a summary of the things that I found when I went through everybody's code that could be improved. Some of the stuff is purely stylistic, like getting in the habit of using get mapping and post mapping as opposed to request mapping. Other stuff is more significant, namely things like making sure that you use the most efficient lookup mechanism, such as a map, as opposed to a list, or even worse, using a map and then converting it into linear search, which kind of defeats the whole point of using a map, or at least defeats part of the point of using a map.